When we determine our 12 archetypes, the 4 survivals, 8 individual ones, we cast the archetypes into the wheel. We end up having 1 archetype per house, and each house represents a key area of your life. And this offers you key insights into the aspect of yourself that is most commonly showing up in this area of your life, which gives you a lot of insights into maybe things to explore, things to take a look at, different choices to make, things to shift. Hello, welcome back to Healing the Mind with Greg Schmaus. I am your host. I'm super excited for today's episode. Today we're diving into the archetype wheel, which is one of my favorite topics. It's some of my favorite work to do with my one-on-one coaching clients and one of my favorite topics to teach in both workshops and webinars. So the archetype wheel was developed by Caroline Myss, and she's been one of the key experts in the work of archetypes. And she's the one who discovered the 4 survival archetypes, which I've talked a lot about on podcasts. It's something that I teach in my Healing Your Core Archetypes online program. And it's something that I've taught a lot in recent workshops and webinars and work that I do with my one-on-one coaching clients. The 4 survival archetypes are really the key answers to the million-dollar question of why some people don't heal, right? So the 4 survival archetypes of the child, the victim, the saboteur, and the prostitute are our core survival programs that ensure our safety and security, but often at the expense of our own health, freedom, and empowerment. And so healing these 4 survival archetypes, which Caroline Myss discovered, is absolutely essential to the healing process, which is why I emphasize it so much in my work, in my teachings, in my coaching, and in my online program, Healing Your Core Archetypes. So the archetype wheel is based on the wheel of astrology, the 12 houses of astrology, which each house represents a key area of your life. And we're going to go into some of the specifics of these houses today. When we're working with the archetype wheel, we each are working with 12 core archetypes that are key archetypes that we're playing out in this lifetime, that we have contracts with. So we go through a process which I'll guide you through and I'll explain to you. We go through a process of determining our 12 core archetypes, 4 of which are those survival archetypes, and then there's 8 individual ones that differ person to person. We go through a process of casting those archetypes into the wheel. So you end up having 1 archetype per house, showing you the key archetype that is showing up in that area of your life. So you can have a greater understanding of why you show up in certain areas the way you do, why you make certain choices the way you do, why you behave the way you do in certain areas, and what some of the patterns are that are being invited for you to look at and explore in each of these key areas. And today I'm going to use my archetype wheel as an example. And today we're going to go through houses 1 through 6. If we have a little bit of time, we might do a little bit more, but I might save a part 2 for houses 7 through 12. So we'll just see on timing how many houses we get through. And so, like I said, you go through a process of determining your 12 archetypes, 4 survival archetypes, 8 individual ones. And there's a deck of cards that you can order online. If you go on Amazon and type in Caroline Myss archetype cards, you can get the deck of archetypes that you can work with. And so when we determine our 12 archetypes, the 4 survivals, 8 individual ones, we cast the archetypes into the wheel. We end up having 1 archetype per house, and each house represents a key area of your life. And this offers you key insights into the aspect of yourself that is most commonly showing up in this area of your life, which gives you a lot of insights into maybe things to explore, things to take a look at, different choices to make, things to shift, etc. So it's a great point of self-reflection. It becomes almost like a blueprint of your psyche, a mirror to look into so you can see a lot of the patterning that's playing itself out in your life. So if we start with the first house is your sense of who am I? The million-dollar question in the first house is who am I? It's your ego, your personality, your sense of identity, your persona, what you present to the world, how you wish to be seen in the world. And so in my first house, I have the healer archetype. The healer for me is very much aligned with my purpose, with my mission, and the sense of what I'm here to do, right? So in my work, you could say the healer archetype shows up, but a lot of times I identify who I am as a healer. And there's a light and shadow side to it. The light side is I really thrive in that role. I very much identify with that role, and I love to present myself as a healer to the world. And it's kind of like the gift I feel like I have to bring to the world. So there's a huge aspect of my identity that's woven into the healer archetype. The shadow side, where I have to be careful, is when my identity is too attached to the healer archetype, where either I have a hard time shifting out of that role and playing other roles in relationship, not always trying to be the healer, or when the healer is so identified with its role that it becomes more of a rescuer, going around trying to fix everybody, trying to change everybody, and being kind of almost like overly possessed by that archetype because your sense of self, your ego, your personality is too woven into it, right? So the light side is there's a sense of pride and connection to this is who I am. This is what I present to the world. This is what I have to offer the world. And kind of just like this core identity and purpose. The shadow side is when I'm overly identified with that role, that's where I get into trouble. Trying to be the healer for everybody or falling into the trap of being a rescuer, right? So that's the first house is who am I? This is the archetype that you identify with, that you present to the world the way you want to be seen, and the archetype that your persona or your ego is very attached to, right? So house number 1 is who am I? For me, it's the healer. House number 2 represents life values. Life values represent your material values, like your possessions, the things you claim ownership of, your finances, your clothing, your car, your shoes, all of the things that you consider to be your resources. That is the second house. On a deeper level, the second house relates to how you value yourself, your self-esteem, your self-worth, and what you feel like you have to offer the world, right? So the key thing in the second house is what I have to offer, what I value, and where my self-worth and self-esteem comes from, and then what my relationship with finances and material possessions might be. I'm just going to take a sip of water and then we'll continue. So in the second house, I have the liberator archetype. So the liberator archetype, the light side is the liberator is all about freedom, liberating, freeing oneself, freeing others from any perceived limitations. So the liberator is all about freedom and liberation. The shadow side of the liberator is the liberator does not like any constraints. So it never wants to feel tied down and often might struggle with commitment, right? Sometimes the liberator might see commitment as a threat to its freedom, right? So the liberator might not want to commit to a relationship, not want to sign a contract. The liberator has a hard time making commitments because it's always trying to protect and preserve its freedom. So in the second house for me, one thing that's important is I really value more of a minimalist lifestyle. I don't like the accumulation of stuff. So the liberator for me is all about traveling light, not being overly attached to material possessions, feeling free or liberated from the need to accumulate material goods, and living more of a minimalist lifestyle being something I value. Remember, the second house is a lot about values. So one of my strongest values is freedom. So whenever I feel like my freedom is threatened or being taken away, it's very activating for me because freedom is one of my highest values, right? So the liberator in the second house is there because of that. what I have to offer, you could say that in a lot of my work, liberation or creating freedom where there's perceived limitation is one of the things that I have to offer, whether it's in my teaching, in my coaching, or in my programs. Freedom might be the thing that, freedom might be the offering that I'm bringing to the world, and my healing work, coaching work, or teachings are the delivery mechanism for that. So, second house being values, freedom is really of one of my highest values. The shadow side where I have to be careful is, for example, around things like finances and contracts or commitments. Sometimes the liberator in me doesn't want to say yes to something because it doesn't want to be tied down. It doesn't want to sign a contract because it doesn't want to be locked into anything. So I have to be careful as to when I might be avoidant of commitment with the liberator in the second house. So remember, first house is this is who I am. For me, it's the healer. Second house is this is what I have to offer and what I value. I have the liberator. Third house is how I express myself. The third house is communication, self expression, interactions, and perception. So, how we perceive and interact with the world is the third house. The third house can also be relationships with siblings, because sibling relationships are often where we start to learn and develop our communication skills. For me, in the third house, I have the addict, which is a very interesting archetype because in the past, I have in the past struggled with patterns of addiction, whether it was tobacco or nicotine, things like that. So certain substances I would find myself getting addicted to. So when I casted my archetype wheel and the addict showed up in the third house, I thought that was very interesting because the third house has nothing to do with the consumption of substances. It has everything to do with communication and expression. So what I have to be mindful of and aware of in the third house is where my addiction shows up in communication, right? So the addict is the one that's always going to extremes, right? So it could be I have an addiction to people's approval, or I have an addiction to external validation, or I have an addiction to being right all the time. So I might go to extreme measures as a way of trying to get that, right? So I might communicate in a way that might not be perfectly authentic, but maybe I'm saying what I think someone wants to hear because I get the approval that the addict in me gets high off of, right? Or I might have a tendency to over explain things because I have the addictive need to be right or to be validated or to be, heard in a certain way or valued in a certain way. So for me, the work in the third house is all about honesty and and self-resourcing, honesty and self-resourcing, because the characteristics of the addict is the addict tends to not be honest with oneself and is not always honest with others. The addict tends to live what's called a story gap or to hold a secret story. The story gap is the difference between the story we tell ourselves and the story we tell the world. So our internal story and our external story are not always matching. So the addict in the third house for me is collapsing the story gap and living in full congruency with one story, which is really the attribute of honesty. And in addition to that, there's integrity that is really important. Sometimes the addict steps out of integrity or alignment with values. The addict in the third house for me is also about self-resourcing. So self-resourcing that approval, self-resourcing that validation, and self-resourcing the needs that I'm trying to desperately get met through others. The addict in the third house for me, there's an energy of desperation, of like needing to get that fix of approval or that hit of validation that feels good for a few minutes, but then leaves us kind of empty and needing or desiring more, right? So it was really beautiful when I saw the addict in the third house because it made so much sense to me based on my life journey and life experience. The fourth house, so let me backtrack for a sec. First house, who I am. Second house, what I have to offer and what I value. Third house, how I express and perceive. Fourth house is where I'm from, right? So the fourth house is family of origin, parents, home of origin, the environment you grew up in. So essentially, the fourth house is where you come from, that which you consider to be home, and your relationship with home and family life. So in the fourth house, I have the Hermit, which was no surprise when it landed there, because everyone knows if you live with Greg, it's always, where is Greg? He's always, hiding somewhere, either meditating or doing Tai Chi or reading somewhere, or the home environment for me really appeals to my Hermit because I love being alone. I love spending time with myself, and sometimes the Hermit in me gets overly saturated with too much engagement with people. So when I come home, I love to have quiet time and space for myself. And so what I have to be mindful of is, number one, honoring my need for alone time, especially when I'm home. But number two, making sure that I'm not withdrawing and that I'm spending the time with myself in a quality way in which I'm spending the time tuning in rather than checking out, right? So the Hermit for me is a lot about tuning in rather than checking out. A lot of people spend time alone with themselves, but they're checking out on social media, on Netflix, on the internet. So they're not really actually they're not actually with themselves. They're checking out and distracting themselves with something else, right? So it's still you engaging something outside of you. You're never really alone in those situations. So tuning in versus checking out is a big element with the Hermit. And then for me, what I've noticed is the importance of having a Hermit at home and honoring that, but also learning how to communicate to others, especially those that I live with, what the needs of my Hermit actually are. Because a lot of times I might go and take 30 minutes or an hour for myself, but I didn't tell anyone what I was doing or where I was going or how long I was going to be gone for. So a lot of times the perception is either Greg disconnects, Greg withdraws, Greg doesn't want to spend time with us. There's a lot of narratives that are often created by those that I live with when I don't communicate what the needs of my Hermit might be, whether it's I'm going to go meditate in this room for an hour, or I'm going to go for a walk. I will be back in 45 minutes, whatever it is, to communicate the needs of the Hermit. So those in my fourth house, home and family life, don't misinterpret it as me withdrawing, right? And so that's something that I've really had to learn, because a lot of times the classic thing would be me disappearing because my Hermit needed to be alone, but I didn't communicate to anyone what I needed and how long I was going to be gone for, right? Another big thing is the Hermit is introverted, so it's introspective, it's inward focused. And the fourth house is your sense of home, where you feel at home. So the fourth house for me is a lot about feeling at home within myself, right? Feeling at home within my body, feeling at home within my heart, within my mind, with my breath, right? So finding home within rather than always attaching it externally, right? So the evolution of the first four houses is who I am, the healer, where I'm, what I have to offer, what I value, the liberator, how I express. I have the addict. Where I'm from, I have the hermit. And then the fifth house is your sense of joy. It's your creativity. It's your sense of fun and play, your relationship with children, and your sexuality and romance. For me in the fifth house, I have the invisible child, right? So the invisible child for me is the child that either never felt seen or has the fear slash desire of being seen, right? So on some level, the invisible child might desire to be seen, but on a deeper level, it might have a fear of being seen. So this has definitely showed up in my relationship with creativity, in relationship with sexuality, in relationship with intimacy is that desire slash fear of fully being seen in my own expression. The fifth house also relates to your gifts, right? So the gifts that you have to offer the world, it's what you love to do. So for me, the invisible child, the gift is the child archetype, that the invisibility piece, the light side, is not having to be the center of attention. Almost like Ramdas talks about becoming nobody, being able to be invisible, but to still bring value and presence, right? Not needing to be the center of attention, not needing to be in the spotlight, just kind of going about my business and, seeing myself, but not always needing to feel seen or validated by everyone else, right? So the fifth house is, like I was saying, also the gifts that you have to offer. So the invisible child in me might struggle with the fear of bringing my gifts out into the world, because the invisible child feels wounded because it feels invisible, but it also feels safe because it's invisible, right? So remember, being seen also opens you up for being attacked, for being judged, for being rejected. So you see that there's kind of this inner tug of war game, this inner conflict with the invisible child, especially in the fifth house, which is the desire to be seen in my fullness, in my creative expression, but also the fear of being seen in my fullness and creative expression because of what the repercussions might be, right? I might get judged, I might get rejected, I might be ridiculed, I might be criticized, I might get abandoned, etc., etc. House number 6 is work and health. This could be your inner work. This could be your outer work, as in your career or occupation. And it also relates to your health, so your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And the sixth house is kind of like, almost like what we have to do, where the fifth house is what I love to do. Right? So the fifth house, your joy, your creativity, your fun, your play, that's all what I love to do. Work and health is kind of like the things that I have to do on some level, right? So here in the sixth house, I have the hero. So work and health, I have the hero. And this archetype for me is, on the light side, all about the hero's journey, the journey of personal empowerment, overcoming obstacles. The shadow side is where the hero always needs to be the one that saves the day for some recognition or external approval, right? So for me in the sixth house, my health journey has been my hero's journey, which is the foundation for all the work offerings that I give in my coaching, in my teachings, and in my online programs. So my health journey has been my hero's journey, which is the foundation of all my work. But where I have to be careful in the sixth house is with my clients, for example, where the hero in me wants to be the hero, wants to save the day, wants to fix and rescue everyone, and kind of get a statue of recognition as a result of it, right? So you can see how that might show up in the sixth house. So you could see the first 6 houses, which I think we're going to stick with that today. And part 2, we're going to go into houses 7 through 12. So this gave you a nice preview of the first 6. Next time, we're going to go into 7 through 12. I gave you examples of my archetypes in each one of these houses and how that might relate to the topic of a given house and the archetype that's in relationship with it or has a contract with it. Now, the archetype wheel work is work that I do a lot, like I said, in my one-on-one coaching practice. I often teach archetype workshops. We go into the core archetypes, the 4 survival archetypes, plus 3 additional archetypes in my online program, Healing Your Core Archetypes, A Journey of Empowerment, which if you click the link in the show notes and use the discount code podcast20, you can save 20% off on your archetypal journey. I love that program. Creating that program was so much fun. It was so magical, and I'm super excited to share it with you. If you want to do your archetype wheel, you can reach out to me personally. You can go to my website at healing4d.com. We could set up a time to chat, to connect, and dive into your personal archetype wheel together. And also Mike Salemi's next Men of Movement retreat titled Hold Your Ground. I'm so excited that I am going to be one of the facilitators teaching the archetype work. I'm going to have 3 sessions over the course of the couple days that we're going to be together out in Mount Shasta, which is incredibly beautiful. At the end of October, we're going to dive into the archetype wheel. So I'm going to help you determine your 12 archetypes. Then we're going to cast it into the wheel. And then we're going to do some beautiful interpretations. And doing this within a group of men in a solid container is going to be so powerful. So I'm so excited to share that. We'll have the link to the Men of Movement retreat in the show notes as well. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you enjoyed it, I invite you to like it, subscribe to my channel, and then also share this episode with anyone that you feel may resonate with the content. And I look forward for part 2, where we're going to dive into houses 7 through 12 in the archetype wheel. I look forward to seeing you there. Bye-bye.